Hello students, I am Raghavendra Kumar Singh, faculty of US Academy and Institute. Today we will discuss class 7th geography's third chapter, Our Changing Earth. It will help us to understand about the movement of the earth, which is related to the force, how an earthquake happens. It also explains the terms like a volcano, focus, epicenters, etc. And the concept related to the sea waves, river, ice, and winds. So, let us discuss the chapter. The lithosphere is broken into a number of plates, known as lithospheric plates. These plates move around very slowly because of the movement of the molten magma inside the earth. The molten magma inside the earth moves in a circular manner. The movement of these plates causes changes on the surface of the earth. The earth movement are divided on the basis of forces which causes them. These forces are called endogenic forces and exogenic forces. Endogenic forces, the forces which act in the interior of the earth, are called endogenic forces. Endogenic forces sometimes produces sudden movement and at other times produces slow movement. Sudden movement like earthquakes and volcano cause mass destruction over the surface of the earth. While in exogenic forces, the forces that works on the surface of the earth are called exogenic forces. Now volcano. A volcano is a vent in the earth crust through which molten material erupts suddenly. Earthquake. When the lithospheric plates move, the earthquake means the surface of the earth vibrates and it travels all around the earth. This vibration are called earthquakes. Focus. The place in the earth where the movement starts is called the focus. Epicenter. The place on the surface above the focus is called the epicenter. Vibration travels outward from the epicenter as waves. The greatest damage is usually closest to the epicenter, and the strength of the earthquake decreases away from the center. Some common earthquakes prediction method adopted locally by peoples include studying animal behavior. Fish in the pond get agitated, snakes come to the surface. Now the major landforms. The landscapes is being continuously worn away by two processes, weathering and erosion. Weathering. Weathering is the breaking up of the rocks on the earth's surface, while erosion is the wearing away of the landscapes by different agents like water, wind and ice. The eroded material is carried away or transported by wind, water, etc. and eventually deposited. This process of erosion and deposition creates different landforms on the earth's surface. Now, the work of the river. Waterfall. When the river tumbles at steep angles over very hard rocks or down a steep valley side, it forms a waterfall. Meander. As the river enters the plain, it twists and turns, forming large bends known as meander. Cut-off lakes. Due to the continuous erosion and deposition along the sides of the meander, the ends of the meander loop come closer and closer. In due course of time, the meander loop cuts off from the river and forms a cut-off lake, also called an oxbow lake. Floodplains, as it floods, the river deposited layers of fine soil and other materials called sediments along with its banks. This leads to the formation of the flat, fertile floodland. The raised banks are called levees. Distributaries. When the river approaches the sea, the speed of the flowing water decreases and the river begins to break up into a number of streams called distributaries. Now the deltas. The river became so slow that it began to deposit its load. Each distributary forms its own mouth. The collection of sediments from all the mouths forms a delta. Now, work of sea. Work of sea waves. The erosion and deposition of the sea waves give rise to coastal landforms, and they continuously strike at the rocks, developing cracks. The cracks became larger and wider over time, due to which hollow-like caves are formed on the rocks. They are called sea caves. Sea arches. When these cavities became bigger and bigger, only the roof of the caves remain. It forms sea arches. Stacks. Erosion breaks the roof and only walls are left, and these walls-like features are called stacks. Sea cliff. The steep rocky coast rising almost vertically above seawater is called sea cliff. Now work of ice. Glaciers. Glaciers are a river of ice which erode the landscapes by bulldozing soil and stones to expose the solid rock below. Glaciers carve out deep below there. As the earth ice melts, they get filled up with water and become beautiful lakes in the mountains. Glacial Moraines. The materials carried by the glaciers, such as rocks, big and small, sand and silt, gets deposited and form glacial moraines. Now the work of wind. Wind in the desert, an active agent of erosion and deposition, is wind. Mushroom rocks. In deserts, rocks can be shaped like a mushroom, commonly called mushroom rocks. Sand dunes. When the wind blows, it lifts and transports and from some places to another. When it stops blowing, the sand falls and gets deposited in low hill-like structures. These are called sand dunes. Now the loess. When the grains of sand are very fine and light, the wind can carry it over very long distance. When such sand is deposited in large areas is called loess. The damages caused due to the earthquake can be minimized if we are prepared beforehand. During an earthquake, one can take shelter under a kitchen counter, table or desk, against an inside corner or wall. One should be away from fireplaces, areas around chimney, windows, etc. The erosion and deposition of the sea waves give rise to coastal landforms. Hollow-like caves are formed on the rocks at the coast due to erosional work of sea waves. These formations are called sea caves. When these cavities become very big, only the roof of the caves remains, forming sea arches. These roofs sometimes break due to erosion and thus only fall. Walls are left. These walls-like features are known as stacks. The steep stacks coast rising almost vertically above seawater is called sea cliff. The sea waves deposit sediments along the shores, forming beaches. The landscapes is eroded due to glaciers, which are rivers of ice. The materials carried by the glaciers, such as rocks, sand, and silt, get deposited and forms glacial moraines. The wind is an active agent of erosion and deposited in the desert. When the wind blows, it lifts and transports sand from one place to another. When it stops blowing, the sand falls and gets deposited in low hill-like structures known as sand dunes.